Here in chapter 23, looking at non-helminth diseases of the GI system. Starting first in the mouth, so cavities. One of the most common infectious diseases actually in human beings. So it is very common. Again, typically not really something you think about as a disease, but it is, again, by definition, a disease. So it's the most common disease in people. It causes dissolution of the tooth surface due to the metabolic action. So as bacteria is breaking down carbohydrates and getting energy, they go through mainly fermentation, releasing acids, and that dissolves or breaks down the enamel. The main causative agent here is Streptococcus mutans and Streptococcus sobrinus are the main, but not the only causes. Just a few stages here of plaque and karyogenesis. So incidence again of dental caries varies. This depends on carbohydrate or sugar consumption. So the more sugar we consume, the more food we're giving the bacteria, the more likely to get cavities. Of course, oral hygiene, brushing, flossing, all that good stuff. But even with all that, there is still genetic factors that come into play. So even people who don't eat a lot of sugar and have good oral hygiene could have genetic factors that make cavities common. The streptococci, they produce a sticky polymer of glucose. Those are called fructans and glucans. So this is going to help produce that kind of sugary layer, kind of like a capsule on the outside. But especially this is what allows them to form those biofilms that makes them really hard to get rid of. So just kind of looking here at the appearance of plaque, and again, here are these biofilms, which is just a community of different microbes, and they release those sugary substances, those fructans, allows other microbes to stick to them, creates this community that is hard to treat. So even, brushing and all that can make it hard to get rid of all of those bacteria. All right, so our summative table here, again, lots of different bacteria, but again, kind of the hallmark is that they produce acids during metabolism. They're able to go through adhesion with that sugary layer and produce acid that breaks down the enamel, so preventing with good oral hygiene, and then just removing the diseased tooth is the treatment. Then, so in the mouth, periodontitis disease initially starts as gingivitis, so just swelling, loss of normal contour, patches, redness, increased bleeding. We can get some spaces or pockets between the tooth and the gingiva, so the gums. Then it extends into the periodontal membrane, hence the name periodontitis disease. And then deeper involvement increases the size of the pockets and actually causes the bone to be reabsorbed. And then, of course, the bone loss leads to tooth loss. Just kind of a picture here showing this. So again, normal kind of state. So here's the gingiva, so the gum bone underneath there. So as we get this increased buildup here of bacteria and microbes, it causes this pocket to form in between the tooth and the gum or the gingiva that continues deteriorating until it gets down into that periodontal area. Some of the risks of this, again, those at risk of cavities or periodontitis, is directly related to the presence of a bacteria called Methanobrevibacter aurealis. So this is part of that kind of normal microbiota. Some have, some don't. So first associated with the archaeal, they produce methane here. Also various behaviors, again, not brushing, flossing, eating lots of sugar, genetic influence. Even some tooth position can lead to some cavities or like pockets forming between the gingiva that make it easier for this to occur, as well as mineralized plaques. Again, not getting regular dental visits to get rid of all that plaque. So advanced, again, just essentially receding here of the gum line as it continues to eat away. Again, you start to see these pockets here that are forming until eventually that periodontitis disease occurs. There is necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis and periodontitis. This is referred to as trench mouth, based on poor hygiene during World War I, where this was common. So synergistic, again, just meaning they feed off of each other. Involvement of a few microbes, bacteria here, Treponema vincenti, Voltella intermedia, and then Fusobacteria species. And this leads to severe pain and bleeding, kind of a fake membrane forming, as well as necrosis, or the death of tissue. So this necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis, abbreviated NUP, is also associated with a lot of bone destruction. So again, looking here at our table with periodontitis, as well as the NUP and the necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis or periodontitis. Again, multiple bacteria cause both of these. It lists a few of those, but it is a polymicrobial, that biofilm that's collecting there. Again, being able to induce inflammation in both of those. Necrotizing, though, means that it's invasive, so it's just able to eat down tissue more so than the non-necrotizing. So removal of plaque is important, as well as gum reconstruction can occur, and some anti-inflammatory treatments. Whereas with the necrotizing, actually getting rid of the tissue and possibly antibiotics can help. Mumps, so we've mentioned mumps before, but we talk about it here with the GI because it is associated with distinct painful swelling of the jaw. It is caused by a virus, the Maramoxovirus, which is a single-stranded RNA virus. It has about a 2 to 3 week incubation period, so you're exposed quite a while before signs and symptoms occur, which include fever, nasal discharge, kind of muscle pain, malaise. Again, that could go along with the flu or cold or anything. But then it's followed by inflammation of the salivary glands, and it produces kind of this gopher-like swelling in the cheeks. And we can see that here. This is kind of the hallmark sign here of the mumps. So some of the complications with this is that it can invade other organs. That's why we talked about it before. About 20 to 30 young adult males get infections localized in the epididymis and the testes, but it does not cause sterility. So the effects of the virus that are shown here. So again, the virus is coming in. Of course, the causes kind of endocytosis or phagocytosis of this as the virus comes in. It uncoats and is released, but then it just keeps spreading into other cells. So it's able to keep attaching to other cells to spread. So again, caused here by the Paramoxovirus, transmitted by droplet contact, so it is contagious. Again, it causes this syncytium, which are those host cells that are coming together so that it can spread. It just makes them fuse together. Supportive treatment is really all that is available, but of course it is something that we vaccinate against in the MMR vaccine. Now looking at gastritis and gastric ulcers. So this was formerly thought to not really be caused by a microbe. It was just thought to be caused by stress or things like that, which can intensify it. But this is a microbial disease. Gastritis is characterized by sharp or burning pain emanating from the abdomen. Ulcers, gastric or peptic ulcers, are lesions in the mucosa of the stomach or the upper part of the small intestine. They are caused, both of them, by a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori that infects about half of the world's population, but can be treated by clarithromycin. The picture here just showing that ulcer there that is forming as a result of this bacteria. So again, our bacteria here, so transmission is oral to oral, but also oral to fecal route is possible as well. It does have the ability to release adhesins, so it can attach, and it produces an enzyme called urease as well. Again, treatment and secreting or suppressing acid is the care that is used. Now moving into diarrhea, so with or without vomiting. Just by definition, diarrhea is defined as 3 or more loose stools within a given 24-hour period. Of course, this is very prevalent within the United States. Third of cases transmitted by contaminated food. In tropical countries, children experience this more than 10 or so times a year. And then more than 100 or 700,000 children actually die from diarrhea in developing countries. Some of the most common and most deadly, so just looking, again, multiple causes of diarrhea. Norovirus is the most common of them. However, the deadliest, though not the most common, is Salmonella and Toxoplasma. Those are the two most likely to lead to death from diarrhea. So looking at Salmonella, it is gram-negative, it is motile, so it has flagella and other motile parts. It's divided into different serotypes or different typings based on proteins that are made on their surface called major surface antigens. Those antigens have letters. So H is a flagellar antigen, K is capsule, and O is a cell wall. So again, it's just a way of diagnosing these different strains or serotypes. They ferment glucose and produce acid and gas. So they produce hydrogen sulfide instead, but not urease, that we had just seen previously. And they can grow rapidly, so it is easy to diagnose them, but they do survive in inhospitable environments like the stomach. Some of the signs and symptoms, again, this Salmonella causes multiple diseases, not just diarrhea. Salmonellosis causes enteric fever or gastroenteritis, which range from mild gastroenteritis, which leads to vomiting, diarrhea, mucus irritation, but then also to fever and even septicemia, where that infection gets into the blood. Salmonella, though, also causes typhoid fever, the subtype serotype typhi, so Salmonella enterica. So this one also has the ability to cause disease, though is dependent on its ability to attach to the gut mucosa. So it has a high what's called ID50, just meaning infectious dose that's needed, just meaning that it takes a lot of exposure to these bacteria in order to cause the disease. Another one related here to diarrhea is Shigella, also gram-negative rods. This one is non-motile, though, and it is unable to form endospores. It also cannot produce urease or acid, hydrogen sulfide. Shigella dysenteria is the most common, or causes the most common form here. It is uncommon in the United States, though, and occurs primarily in the Eastern Hemisphere. So some of the symptoms, again, diarrhea is already mentioned, nausea, vomiting can occur, dysentery, which is diarrhea containing blood, and then the mucus from the GI is also present in the stool. Some of the pathogenesis and virulence, so it invades the villus cells of the large intestine, but can't perforate the intestine or invade the blood. It does release endotoxin, which causes the fever. The enterotoxin it releases affects the entire GI tract, causing damage to the mucus in the villi. And then it also produces a Shiga toxin that's responsible for the most serious damage to the intestine and systemic effects. So just kind of looking again, normal GI tract, kind of shown here. You can see the very damaging effects from those toxins released by the Shigella species. Right, Shiga toxin producing E. coli or STEC. So this is an E. coli. So typically, whenever we think about a GI infection, we think about E. coli, especially from contaminated foods. This is one of the main things they look for in like having recalls is the presence of this bacteria. Excuse me. So the symptoms range. So it can be mild. But then also to very bloody diarrhea. There can be a hemolytic uremic syndrome. This causes severe anemia or iron deficiency and can cause kidney damage as well. So those toxins are identical, though, to the Shiga toxins produced by Shigella that we just mentioned. And this is transmitted, though, through ingestion of undercooked beef, but also other contaminated foods. So again, this is commonly something that is sampled to be sure that foods are not contaminated or recalled if it is found. A few other types of E. coli, there are many. Most of them have abbreviations. So enterotoxigenic, enteroinvasive, enteropathogenic, enteroaggressive, enteroagglutinative, as well as this diffusely adherent E. coli. These cause just slightly different symptoms to occur. I'm not going to have you differentiate between the different types, just to have an appreciation, though, that there are multiple types of E. coli, and some of them can cause different symptoms. Then we have the Campylobacter. This is the most common cause of bacterial diarrhea in the U.S. So again, focusing more on the United States, this is most common here. So frequent watery stools can lead to fever, vomiting, headaches. The symptoms can last even longer than 2 weeks and can reoccur. One of the main species is Campylobacter jejuni, which is kind of slender and curved, has more of kind of a spiral shape with flagella. It's microaerophilic, meaning it can handle a little bit of oxygen, but it doesn't really like a lot, which allows it to survive in the mouth and the GI. How it's transmission or transmitted is by ingestion of contaminated beverages, food, milk, meat, chicken. So lots of different contaminated food and beverages here. There was an outbreak in the late 2019 to 2020 in about 30 states. And this was from contact with the stool of healthy looking puppies from a pet store that led to mass spreading of this disease. Another one related here to diarrhea, we have Clostridium difficile, also gram-positive. This is a spore former, again, the Clostridium species here. It is part of our normal biota in the intestine, but again, if it can expand beyond its normal numbers, that's whenever it becomes problematic. It can cause this pseudomembranous colitis and antibiotic-associated colitis. So again, taking an antibiotic for something else destroys some of the normal flora and can allow this one to kind of get out of whack. It's precipitated again by therapy of broad-spectrum antibiotics. It releases a couple enterotoxins A and B that cause necrosis of the intestine, so it can be treated by getting rid of the antibiotics so the normal biota can reestablish, as well as some antibiotics, and even, sounds nasty, I know, but even a fecal transplant to put back some of those normal microbes. This is just looking at what this infection looks like. Again, healthy GI system here, definitely not so healthy due to that inflammation and necrosis caused by the bacteria. All right, another one here, Vibrio cholera, as the name implies, going to cause cholera. This is a curved rod, has flagella. A lot of these have that flagella. They go through fermentation, typically likes our body temperature around 37, but it possesses a couple unique antigens called O and H, as well as some other unique antigens to it. So this outbreak of cholera expected to happen, especially after natural disasters, war, or large refugee movements whenever sanitation is an issue. So some of the signs and symptoms, vomiting, kind of the hallmark is rice water stool that's seen, leads to profuse water loss, which causes a lot of the problems. Also acidosis, as it's going through fermentation, depletes potassium, which then causes cramps, thirst, flaccid skin, sunken eyes. Essentially, they're dehydrated, but it can also lead to convulsions and comas, especially in young children. And due to the loss of water and blood volume, hypotension, tachycardia, it's also possible cyanosis, kind of looking blue, and even shock. It does have a high mortality rate, about 55 to 70%. A little bit more about the bacteria. It produces a toxin called the cholera toxin that disrupts those intestinal cells, causes large shedding of electrolytes, causes quorum sensing, where again, kind of brings in a large number of these, or can kind of spread and talk. That regulates gene expression and increases the virulence factor. So it increases the toxin production. So it is transmitted mainly in water, so warm monsoon, kind of alkaline saline conditions favor its growth. So can be treated though with oral rehydration, so essentially replenishing those fluids. All right, some of the non-cholera Vibrio species. It is actually more common to experience an infection with the non-cholera species than the cholera species. These are called vibriosis. Their prominent causative agents is Vibrio vulnificus and Parahemolyticus. So the factors here that increase the chance of these, raw oysters are often contaminated with them. So however, as we increase awareness, more people can be diagnosed. That warming climate is also increasing their habitats, allowing them to live and survive in more conditions. All right, another one here still related to diarrhea. So Cryptosporidium. This is one of the protozoans. So again, a lot of the GI is caused by bacteria or the helminths, but this is one of the protozoans. So this is kind of hardy intestinal oocyte, which is not as protective as an endospore, but it is kind of a dormant state. It is hard to treat, so it survives the acidity of the stomach. It penetrates the intestinal cell wall and lives intracellular, so inside of our cells. Again, those oocytes are highly infectious and resistant, so they can survive. Some of the symptoms, we have headaches, sweating, vomiting, severe cramps, and diarrhea. And these are often associated with swimming pools because, again, they can survive in those chlorine conditions. I'm just kind of looking at what these guys look at. So the green, those are, this is a scanning electron microscope looking at this attached to those intestinal epithelia. Right, now one of the viruses, so we talked about a protist, now looking at one of the viruses that causes diarrhea is rotavirus, which is a double-stranded RNA genome. It does have inter-outed capsids that help them kind of protein coat. Primarily cause morbidity and mortality resulting from the diarrhea. Just kind of looking at some of the epidemiology here. Transmitted by the fecal oral route and contaminated foods, which is kind of a common theme. Children treated with ORT, so it is somewhat treatable, as well as there are a couple attenuated vaccines that can be given to protect against this as well. Right, then our most common, here's the norovirus. Again, this is the most common foodborne disease in the US. So again, fecal oral, as well as contaminated food. This causes profuse watery diarrhea for about 3 to 5 days. Vomiting can occur in the early stages with mild fever It does have a low infectious dose, just meaning not very many are required for you to get the disease. So it is able to attach very easily. This is also pretty commonly what is found on outbreaks on cruise ships or due to this norovirus. And again, summary figures here. So lots of microbes that go along here with this acute diarrhea. Again, Salmonella, Shigella, and that E. coli that is there. Again, all of them, or all three of these, are caused by bacteria, going to be fecal-oral contamination that allows transmission. They produce, all three of these produce different toxins that are their virulence factors, and then can be treated with various antibiotics. Some of the other E. coli, looking at Campylobacter and Clostridium, again, all bacteria that go in, again, by that fecal-oral route mainly as far as transmission. But again, the Clostridioses, this is part of our normal biota, so it is already there. So again, typically associated with antibiotic treatment. Various virulence factors. The Campylobacter does produce the toxin as well as the Clostrides. The other E. coli's typically do not, but depends, of course, on which one we're talking about. Here, for the most part, rehydration is kind of the common theme here. The Campylobacter, though, is listed as a serious threat, and the Clostrides is an urgent threat with the CDC. Right, we also have the Vibrio cholerae that causes the cholera because of that toxin that gets released. Again, rehydration, possibly some doxycycline to help. There are other non-cholera, though, Vibrio species that lead to acute diarrhea. Again, typically found in the oysters, but can be treated by the doxycycline. Right, our Cryptosporidium, and then which is our parasite or protist, and then our two viruses that we talked about, the rota and the norovirus. Again, these all caused by the fecal-oral route or by food. Looking, of course, at their, for the most part, here with fever, we often have fever associated with the Cryptosporidium and roto, sometimes with the norovirus, but not always. Again, the Cryptosporidium is resistant to the chlorine. Rotavirus is especially severe in infants, and then the nora is resistant to disinfection.